Technology in the U.S., and I'm Executive Director of the Institute for People and Technology. And it's my great pleasure to be moderating this morning's panel. We are the first panel on the last day, so I know that means a lot of us are probably a little weary and sleepy, but hopefully we'll be able to get some energy going in the room. We're looking for a lot of interactivity and hope to have a dynamic conversation. I think the topic of this morning's panel is a great kind of bow to wrap around a lot of the issues that were just being glossed from yesterday and even from the first day, because it's really probing at some foundational questions. And the way I want to frame some of this question, and it's about digital sovereignty and digital imperialism, is the way lawyers might refer to this problem, which is cui bono. So the lawyers in the room probably know that cui bono is Latin for who benefits. And I think we've been talking about digital public infrastructure or AI or access versus exclusion. And in some ways, all of that is great. But when we talk about, let's say, fintech, one question is who is benefiting if I have access to fintech? Am I benefiting? Maybe, yes, hopefully. Is the state with which I am a citizen or residing in benefiting? Maybe, yes, perhaps. Is big fintech or big tech in general benefiting? And so to the distinguished panelists that I have the honor to be participating with this morning, I'm going to ask you throughout our conversations to reflect on this question of cui bono. Who is benefiting? So what I'm proposing this morning is we're going to do a first round of about 5 minutes per panelist, where I will ask you to do a quick introduction of yourself. And I'll also ask you to give a little bit of an overview of how you see the problems of digital sovereignty and digital imperialism. I'm also realizing that we're missing one of our panelists, Mathieu. He is right. If somebody would go see, he would have been just sitting right outside. Oh, there he is.
This is what it's the same.
Yeah, you're like, oh, why do I recognize everyone on the panel, but I'm not sitting down there? Welcome, welcome. And so what I'm going to propose is we'll go through each of you will speak for about 5 minutes, maybe just going from my right across the four of you, do a quick self-intro, then frame sort of the issues of digital sovereignty from your perspective, thinking a bit about the cui bono problem, and also, I think, some of the definitional work that I think would be useful. So in other words, what is digital sovereignty? Sovereignty for who? I'm sovereign of my body and myself, I hope. The state might be sovereign of me. Big tech is probably sovereign to the state at this point. You know, those are the kind of questions as to sovereignty for who, or what is sort of the definitional work you would do in terms of the parameters of digital sovereignty, and then reflect on how that fits within your research or your advocacy, your work, and your context. We have, as I say, a distinguished group of panelists, and I'm just going to give a rapid introduction just to let you all know who is coming to speak, and then you'll do a longer self-introduction. To my immediate right is Devon Dublin. He's Research Fellow of the Division of Island Nations at the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. To his right is Mauro Santaniello, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Salerno. To his right is Htaike Aung, Director of the Myanmar Internet Project. And finally, we have Mathieu Ouimet, General Director of the International Francophone Network for Science Advisors. So we have somebody based in Japan, but really thinking about the Caribbean, somebody who is based in Italy, Myanmar, and then somebody who's based in Canada, but thinking about Francophone science across globally. So I think we have a geographically great representation. Oh, and I am now seeing on screen, we have our fifth panelist, namely Nenna Nwakanma, excuse me for my bad pronunciation, ma'am, Global AI Ambassador for HealthAI, and we'll come to you last, ma'am, in the 5-minute self intro and setup. So please, if I can go first to you, Devon. I think the mic is there, and I will kind of keep track of time to make sure we don't go too long.
All right, thank you. I'm not going to do much of a self-introduction because that eats into my time, I think. Suffice to say that I'm from Guyana, the only English-speaking country in South America. I'd like to address this more from a developing nation's perspective. And as you rightly said, I work in the Division of Island Nations, so I'd also like to give some perspective from island nations. For me, when it comes to digital sovereignty, people should be first. So I want to start off with that. But the reality is, it's more linked to governments. They have a really big stake in this, and of course the corporates. But we'll get to that a bit later. What I'd like to start off by doing is using three fairly well-known structures that exist and examine how digital sovereignty is being addressed within those frameworks. And I think that is important because for developing countries, digital sovereignty is not necessarily being pursued in the same way like developed countries. So they don't intend to develop the entire infrastructure by themselves, but there's more of a collaborative approach, so to speak. So I'll start with the non-aligned movement. This was founded in 1961. It has 121 member states. And initially when it was formed to, within the context of the Cold War. And it was intended to advance the interests of developing countries. In the first 3 decades, what we saw was more of an approach towards decolonization. So quite a lot of the member states gained independence during that time. Some became republics, etc. Now, the reason why I think this is important is because within the non-aligned movement, I believe that when it comes to digital sovereignty, the very same principles apply. And if we look at the example right now that's playing out right now between the USA and China, it mirrors very much the Cold War situation. Now, for developing countries, we are definitely consumers of the products that are needed to build this infrastructure. And therefore, if you source it from China or you source it from the USA, this would definitely have implications for the future. So this jostle for space is essentially a jostle for the future, for future control, so to speak. I didn't mention Europe because I think Europe is still working things out. But essentially, I think for North America and for Asia, there is a clear direction of where this is going. And so therefore, within the non-aligned movement, I believe that a modality needs to be worked out for free flow of technology. And within that context, I believe that India is perhaps the most important player, because within the non-aligned movement, India is seen as the big sister when it comes to IT and digital technology, etc. And so the posture that India takes will influence the other member states of the non-aligned movement. The second one I'd like to point out is the Commonwealth, and I'd like to frame this within the context of the legal framework, because you mentioned that as well. So this was started in 1926. There are currently 56 member states, and there are some similarities in culture because they were generally British colonies. There are a few like Rwanda, etc., who joined later on a different mechanism, but largely, there's a British influence there. There's one thing that's unique about these countries is that the legal systems are basically follows the format of the British legal system. And so there are similarities. They're not necessarily the same, but generally they're similar. And so this actually helps in terms of developing a legal framework that's associated with digital sovereignty. And as a matter of fact, some of the member states still have the Judicial Council of the Privy Council of King Charles III as their final court of appeal. One of the things that was released recently, this was released on the 23rd of October this year, just a couple of days ago. It's called NAGDI, National Agricultural Data Infrastructure Policy Guide. And they were working on this for 2 years, and they released it this year. Basically, this guide, it focuses on agricultural productivity and food security. And this guide basically has four, let's call them 4 areas, priority areas. One is data governance and principles, and it looks at setting clear rules, etc., for these systems, access and use. Then there's independent oversight, which would assist with transparency. The third is interoperable technologies. Of course, when you're looking at these topics, different ministries will have to be involved, whether it's business, agriculture, health, etc. And then sustainable financing, ensuring that there's some long-term business model to ensure that it's operated and maintained very well. One important thing is that the Commonwealth Secretariat will provide funds to help the member states to get this up and running very quickly. And it includes mobilizing investment, etc., and providing technical assistance. Now, the reason why this is important is because if you look at it, there are agriculture and food security are basically innocent topics. There's not much argument over it. And so within that context, it was developed. But this very same guide could be used for anything else, including defense, for example. And the third I'd like to mention quickly is the small island developing states. These are basically island nations that are found in the Pacific, in the Caribbean, and Indian Ocean islands in Africa. They generally are very small, small population, big ocean states as well. But they're vulnerable to climate change, and we see what's happening right now with Jamaica and Cuba, etc. And within that context as well, what SIDS is doing is that they're leaning on the United Nations to help them with digital sovereignty, especially UNDP and the International Telecommunications Union. I'll stop there, and I'll pick it up later.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So sovereignty for whom? I will also add sovereignty against whom, because the concept of digital sovereignty is a relational concept. So it establishes a web of relations, cooperation, alliances, but also conflicts. And this is the real novelty of the concept of digital sovereignty within the internet governance debate that has been based for more than 30 years on this idea of cooperation and collaboration. And now we are seeing conflicts. It is not it is just a concept that implies that someone else is preventing us from exercising our own legitimate right to control our technologies and to develop them as we want. So I think that this implies that there is no one digital sovereignty, but there are many multiple digital sovereignties. And you said it recalls the era of the Cold War. I will say that it recalls the era of the wars of religions in Europe, because as Michel Foucault remembers us, he says that during that era, everyone was using the concept of sovereignty as a political resource. So it was used by the monarchists, by the Republicans, by monarchists who wanted to change the dynasty, by those who wanted to keep the ruling dynasty at their place. So more or less, we are living the same situation. And indeed, The concept of digital sovereignty is currently used by authoritarian states, for example. The Russian and Chinese governments have been using it since the World Summit on Information Society in 2003 and 2005, but it is now used also by democratic governments like the European Union member states, but it is used also by civil society and marginalized groups who are claiming their own sovereignty over their own data against their own governments, even though sometimes these governments are democratic governments. And it is used also by private actors. Often the enemy, the adversary of digital sovereignty, especially in the political discourse in the European Union, are the big techs, no? And now if you go on their websites of Amazon, Google, Facebook, and so on, they're using digital sovereignty claims often just to sell sovereign solutions to European governments. So this is a concept that is used by anyone, almost anyone, and it is a performative discourse. It's not just words, but it is something that can change reality. When someone starts to talk about digital sovereignty, you see that their own practices, their own policies and strategies are changing. So what is going on now is that there is this new framing of digital technology that is moving from this idea that was attached to the idea of globalization. And in a period of geopolitical turmoils, we are seeing people asking to control their data flows, their devices, their technologies, and so on. So basically, I think that the concept of digital sovereignty is rendering a situation where conflict is becoming a pivotal concept in internet governance and in the governance of technologies in general. And this is a huge shift because the category of conflict has been eradicated by the discourse on technology for many years. And this has also led some countries and some communities to adopt technology without any kind of reflection about their political implications. So it was just framed as a sort of tool to improve our productivity, to improve the efficiency of the public administration. But it has led to several issues. For example, if you look at the public administration in Western Europe, it has been locked in by using and adopting and never adapting proprietary technologies for their own job. So after 20 years, it became very hard for public administrations in Western countries to change and to really exercise their sovereign right to choose the technologies that were more aligned to their own values and purposes.
Yes, thank you, Michael. And also, hello, everyone. I hope you had a good rest. And I actually come from Myanmar, and the questions around digital sovereignty is actually are not abstract. They actually dictates whether people can connect, learn, or even survive. So before 2021, Myanmar was seen as a success story for digital transformation. So millions of people came online, and there were a good civic tech space, and also with new startups. But when the military seized power, the same digital infrastructure that symbolizes this digital transformation overnight changes into tools for control, for surveillance, for censorship, and also for internet shutdowns as well. So the junta in Myanmar actually tried to use the language sovereignty to justify that data must be localized, and also platforms must comply to national laws. But in reality, it means that handing the junta the information of the users, and also having control over people flow of information and speech. And at the same time, the global platforms and also telecoms that dominates the Myanmar digital spaces are actually based far away, not in the country, and also governed by foreign laws. And at the same time, they make decisions with very little knowledge about what's happening in reality in the ground. So for instance, after the military coup, when Telenor, one of the main telecom company, decided to leave Myanmar, what they had done from their disengagement of their businesses in Myanmar actually leaves a lot of sensitive user data of Myanmar users in the hands of the military junta. And also when we talk about like platforms, for instance, when platforms under moderate harmful content, or maybe they over moderate independent media, the problem, the situation, it's actually like people, the ordinary people are the people who have to pay the price. So for countries like ours, I mean, when we talk about like we are actually caught in between two very different realities. One is authoritarian control in the name of sovereignty, and one is corporate control in the name under innovation. So for countries like Myanmar and for many low and middle income countries, the challenge is not only about having access to infrastructure, or also having access to global economy. It's actually having more about who holds power, and who have the like power over our digital lives. So that's why I in these conversations, I actually want to highlight that the true digital sovereignty must be people-centered. It should be the individuals, the people, the citizens must have the ability to connect safely, to access reliable information, to have privacy, and also have local solutions when global systems fail them. So I just wanted to highlight that the true digital sovereignty, we must think about people center and not just state center or market center. And I think this is very important for countries like ours.
Thank you. Thank you. I tend to agree with my colleagues, and I think what I will bring, it's complementary to that. And when we think about, first I would just explain who I am a little bit more, so you understand from which perspective I will be trying to contribute to this panel. So I have two jobs. In fact, I'm the, as Mike said, director of a Francophone division of INGSA, the International Network for Governmental Science Advice. We're doing some capacity building trainings and developing tools to help government to better access, interpret, and use scientific knowledge in policy making. So, and I'm also, my second job is a faculty member, a professor in political science, where I teach students when they will join governments how to use these tools. And I'm doing research on this area too. So when thinking about digital sovereignty, and just first sovereignty to begin with, the concept of sovereignty, when I thought about it, it's we think about autonomy, and in quite independence of doing something or even thinking about something. So I agree with my colleague that it applies at different levels, people first, but government, corporates, and other actors. And what I want to bring maybe in these panels is using the case of scientific knowledge. That if you want to access to empirical findings in any fields, you have to have access to digital platforms more and more. And this is not new, but maybe it's a reminder that the market for distribution of scientific knowledge embedded in scientific papers is quite bizarre, I will say. It's a market where the distributor, the publishers, they get their I would say they get the paper they sell for free from the researchers, that they are very happy to sign transfer of copyright for prestige. This is the way science is working. So it's it's important to recall that. So there's many problems that comes with this thing, and as you can imagine, after it's if the knowledge is behind paywalls, it's a barrier to access this knowledge for people, but also for government and corporate as well, because I don't have the concrete number here, but it's quite expensive to have access to these platforms and to get access to scientific paper. And scientific knowledge is intangible. It's some things intangible, but some things we need to innovate and to develop policies and tools, instruments for a better life. So the solution was open access, so digital platforms that are open. It's part of the solution, but it's not perfect as a solution, as maybe scientists in the room knows. Some journals and publishers offer the option when your paper is accepted to pay to keep the copyright for open access, but it can be expensive, ranging between $1,000 to $11,000 for flagship journals such as Nature or other journals. So this is quite problem. So I want just to bring the fact that when we think about it, government largely, but not just government, corporate as well, pay for the production of scientific research, and then they have to pay again to have access to part of this knowledge. So I just want to bring this just as a start, think about how we can, when we think about digital sovereignty using different use cases, what will be the solution to increase autonomy and independence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mathieu. And that's very helpful to sort of put this epistemic kind of framing around the and kind of reflecting on what I've heard before of you. And I don't see our who's that? Then call on Nenna from there.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Just checking that you can hear me okay. I'll be very brief, hoping that my connection is good. I'm speaking somewhere in Africa today, and the question about sovereignty, I'm listing a few words: choice, freedom, agency, capacity, competence, and resources. These are words that I would like to link with sovereignty. I may not be able to make the whole of the panel, but I just want to lay a few thoughts that my colleagues can use in our conversation going forward. My first thinking is that the process determines the product. It will ultimately determine the product of that digitalization or digital development, right? So for the moment, the process that we have runs around New York, London, Geneva in digital development. These are the places where we have our most in-depth conversations on digital development. So you are in Clermont-Ferrand today, not far from France, not far from Paris. So if we still have conversations going around New York, Paris, Geneva, Singapore, Shanghai, it means that the product will also reflect that process. And the question is, how many of these conversations are we having in the global south? My second submission is about governance models. Governance models mirror models, right? from my observation, the US model is market driven. The EU is regulatory and citizen driven. The Chinese or Asian is mostly national system driven. But in Africa, so what drives the African digital policy? That's the question. I think it's schizophrenic because basically what happens is that whatever development partner they have is the one who drives. So you have some, on one part you have the Chinese influence, on the other you have the US influence, on the other you have the EU influence, and then you have schizophrenic development processes. Someone has mentioned, my sister, that was a good point. On one hand, we are being managed by governments, and then there is industrial capture. I've noted that in many places in Africa, I may not speak for the whole of the global south, there is a lot of global capture. And we need to take that into collaboration, into consideration. My last point, as I move, I have to get into something else, is about the capacity to govern. Do we have that capacity in Africa? I want to leave that to us because it's regulated and it's in order to ensure that we have that into play. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So if that audio can be muted. Thank you so much for that. Those interesting perspectives. The audio was a little garbled, so there was maybe some trickiness to understand fully what was being said, but I think those were important points coming to us from Africa. What I really wanted to reflect on, and I'm going to put back to you all then a question before we turn it to the audience for your interactions, is that I heard one important, I think, component from many of you, which is that the concepts of digital sovereignty really are parameterized by scale. So sovereignty starts with the person, and I think Htaike, you really brought that point home, but it can include the state, it could include private sector organizations and then I think, Devon, you really brought to mind and reminded us that there are multilateral sovereign networks, starting with the non-aligned movement, but you mentioned other ones that also might be actors within this kind of conversation about digital sovereignty. And so as we think about sort of what this all means, we need to start with thinking about how is it scaled, right? At what scale are we considering the problems of digital sovereignty? And do we start with the person? Do we end with these multilateral networks? And sort of what is in between? Another thing I thought that I heard from many of you is you place digital sovereignty within important historical references and contexts. And I think starting even, Devon, you mentioned the Cold War, thinking about digital sovereignty as a transition from what I would say is a concepts of tech as community and sort of the utopian views of it from the 90s, let's say even before, to one of conflict. And Mauro, you mentioned sort of the core element of conflict in our considerations of internet governance and now digital sovereignty more broadly. And then also this transition or history of these concepts from technologies of freedom to technologies of control. And Htaike, you mentioned sort of this sort of 3-4 month transition from a 2020 election to a 2021 coup in Myanmar, and moving very quickly from a feeling of great opportunity and possibility of this notion of technologies of freedom to very much technologies being a matter of control. And in the instance of Myanmar, that really playing out on the ground in people's lived experience. So with these kind of two ways of thinking about digital sovereignty, namely, how does it situate itself as a matter of scale, and how do we place it in this history of transitions from freedom to control or from community to conflict? I want to go back to the panel, but ask you to add one third element that I think has come up a lot in the last couple of days that I think allows us to sort of root a answer to the how do we manage sovereignty, and that is about trust. So part of what I think these transition points suggest to me is that when we move either from scale or we move from community to control or from community to conflict, it's a matter of how we are positioning our trust in these various aspects of digital sovereignty. Do we trust the person? Do we trust the state? Do we trust the big tech firm or the technologist? Did we trust Myanmar in 2020 before the coup? Do we trust the Myanmar state in 2021 with the military junta in control? Or do we trust the government in Italy, or do we trust the government in the US now? So anyone can maybe jump in, but could you try to answer sort of how you think trust is at the core or not to your conceptualization of digital sovereignty? Yeah, please. Mathieu.
Can start. Okay. Just very quickly, I'm thinking it's very interesting questions, but I will say that rapidly, and I will pass the mic to my colleague. And I don't want to diverge from that, but when I'm thinking about when I was listening to you, I was thinking about interest. I mean, if trusting someone or governments or other actors, I think you need to understand first, it's preliminary to that, what are the interests at play. Depending on which actor you are talking about, there are different interests, and it's life. Okay, so I think it's different than trust, but it has to be considered jointly with trust. You cannot trust someone blindly. You have to understand the context of it.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes. Trust is a central category that also helped to develop our early technologies, especially the internet. The internet was based on trust. Internet service providers often were just researchers interconnecting two different networks in the same device, and this worked for a long time. Of course, since digital technologies have become the backbone of the economy, the politics, and so on, it is harder to just blindly trust anyone. And this is why, for example, we had a window of opportunities during the World Summit on Information Society to constitutionalize this trust. We had this model, the multi-stakeholder model, that involved the private sector, national governments, civil society, academics, and so on. But there were major forces, especially the US government, that prevented this model from becoming a sort of an effective model of governance. So if you can remember, we had Htaike, that is a private sector-led organization ruling all the basic resources of the internet, the DNS, the root servers, and so on, that were just keeping its own power. And then we had the Internet Governance Forum, this multi-stakeholder debate with no outcome. And so if you look at the numbers now of the World Summit on Information Society or the Internet Governance Forum, you can see a dramatic decrease in participation. Because if people and organizations and institutions realize that their own contribution, this debate, is not effective in producing anything, in producing policy, they will stop to participate. So I don't think that currently we are living an era where the concept of trust can still be seen as a pivotal concept. Also because the internet is not something, the internet and digital technologies is not something that comes out of the blue. There was this ideology of cyber exceptionalism that was dominant during the 80s and 90s. But now we know that digital technologies are shaped by politics, by political relations. Which kind of relations we are living right now? They are very conflictual. We have war in the Mediterranean again, we have war in Europe again, and so on. So in this context, I think that we cannot expect just trust or informal agreements to be effective in shaping the internet. There will be these sorts of power plays, and these kind of power plays are conducted by usually huge actors. So to go to your question about the scales, no, where there are a lot of very nice and productive projects conducted by indigenous communities about digital sovereignty. This is a sort of a scale that is very important, but if you look at the broader picture, if you look at technologies like AI, for example, or robotics, these kind of experiences are ineffective, unfortunately are ineffective in shaping technology. Who is currently shaping technology is the military sector in major powers, as for the AI and robotics, and they are also leading investments and so on. So, for example, you said, can we trust the Italian government, notwithstanding their own ideas about liberty, freedom, fundamental rights, and so on? Currently, the Italian government is spending a lot of money in rearming itself, no? Given the Russian threat. But which kind of investments they are conducting? They are conducting those kind of investments that are consistent with their own political culture. So giving money to the big industry. We know that the internet was born in the same condition. There were funds coming from the military, but when Joseph Lee Clyder was giving money to the California universities to develop this network to be resilient vis-a-vis a possible attack, nuclear attack from the Russians, it's established just a broad goal, and they kept the researchers and also the private sector to develop their own technologies. And this sort of freedom in conducting their own research and experiments and so on produced a technology of freedom like the internet of the 80s and 90s. But now the relationships also between governments and academia are completely changed. And I perfectly agree that the epistemic dimension of knowledge production is fundamental to understand digital sovereignty. And I would also add, it's not just that the government, the public sector pays the researcher published for free, and then we have to buy our own articles. It's also the access to data that we need to make research. Currently, big tech owns the data that we will need to make an effective research. That governments need to make evidence-based policies and so on. We do not own those data. And for example, the Cambridge Analytica case was quite highlighting this kind of imbalances and this kind of problem.
So if I had to add a little bit, so for countries like Myanmar and also a lot of countries in the global majority places, the challenge is that this kind of conversations, digital sovereignty, remains kind of far-fetched, because a lot of the platforms, infrastructures that we users are actually are, like, for instance, standards are owned, policies are made far away from us, maybe in Brussels, maybe in Washington, maybe in Silicon Valley. So when we think about that, and when it's come to the question around trust, do we trust those systems that are making a lot of these policies and mechanisms around the systems that we used? And this trust, questions around trust, I think changes according to the context. So in the case like us, for us, we might have a trust in companies that they will be much better in handling our data than our government. But right now it's not the case. Like, for instance, Meta had new policies around how they are looking at users' data, new generative AI, and companies like ChatGPT trying to use a lot of people's data. And for instance, in the case of Myanmar, I mentioned about telecom companies like Telenor. Although we have trusted our user data with them, when they disengaged from Myanmar, they had actually left a lot of data to the government. So this trust is actually very difficult for us about whether trusting the state. Can we trust the corporates, the private sectors? And I think that it's actually very difficult for us to do so. And I think the global systems really failed us in that aspect. And I think that here leaves the questions around how can we build trust or even build capacity for people, particularly for the community, to be meaningfully engaged in digital governance. And also, I think that's the most important point about trust, in my opinion.
Okay, so coming back to the global majority and global minority, really we have to sense this within the context of which country we're talking about, or what type of countries. I'll give you an example. When Japan rolled out their advanced card, it's called My Number, which actually captures all of your data, basically your entire life on a card. There was a lot of pushback. I was among the first to get mine, and my colleagues and friends saw the card for the first time when they saw mine, because they were so apprehensive to get it. On the flip side, in Guyana, when enhanced cards were developed, the citizens were really happy because they saw it as progress. There's these cute cards coming out, compared to the ones that were considered, old technology. So you see there's a difference in the perception of citizens. The big cry in Guyana was about the way in which the company was procured to produce the cards. So you see, when in many developed countries, there's quite a bit of transparency. So the issue is not about how the procurement went, but it's about my data and concerns surrounding that, as opposed to in a developing country where the issue is more about how much money is being spent and which company is selected, as opposed to my data. So you can see a difference there. Compare governments and corporates. I think citizens in developing countries generally has a distrust for governments. And it's because we see the way the government's approach to digital sovereignty tends to lean more on authoritarianism, as is pointed out in the case of Myanmar. And we are seeing it in many of the developing countries. As a matter of fact, in Guyana, most of the citizens see ourselves having an elected dictatorship. Because what happens is that governments tend to say, well, we're democratic because they're, in inverted commas, free and fair elections. And they think that when elections are over, that's the end of democracy. And all aspects of life, there's quite a big deal of authoritarianism there. In relation to corporates, I think citizens in developing countries has quite a big deal of trust, in inverted commas, for corporates. And the reason I say that is they know that the corporates will stand up to their government. Like, you can't just go to Facebook and say, I demand this data from my citizens. Facebook is going to push back on that and say, listen, we have procedures here. You need to file this. You need to make a legal claim or whatever. And so citizens generally see corporates as defending their interests because they wouldn't just hand over information to the government just because they demand it. And I'm coming back to what I started with, and I'll give you the example of the Commonwealth. These guidelines or frameworks, etc., that were developed for digital sovereignty within these organizations cannot be seen in isolation, because the Commonwealth has a charter and all the member states have signed on to it. And within that charter, there are elements that says that member states will respect human rights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So within the context of that charter, any product that is produced must still conform to what they signed on to. And so because of that, there are checks and balances within these networks. And we saw some examples. Nigeria at one time was suspended when duly elected government, civilian government took charge again. The suspension was lifted. We saw the issue where Zimbabwe as well was suspended because of human rights violations. They subsequently withdrew, but right now they're in the process of rejoining. So these are things that encourages citizens. So if it's done within those frameworks, we believe that there are some guardrails that could protect us.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to open it up to questions, but I want to note that digital sovereignty here is framed in a much bigger issue than like digital localization. Does Ukraine need its data within its borders? And what I'm hearing from the panel is that this is an issue that is much bigger, and also a lot of sober kind of concern that we're kind of in an era of conflict and control, but also loss of trust. And I heard from at least two of you that there's loss in trust, though, maybe if we're going to trust anyone, we'll trust big tech over the state. I'm going to open it up to questions. I want also, though, as we're getting a mic to, I see plenty of hands, so please, mics maybe starting on the upper right and then moving this way. I want to ask as the mic is getting over, just yes or no, does Canada or Guyana or Italy or Myanmar need a sovereign AI within the political state? Yes or no?
I would say yes, but it should be anchored down in people. People should be first.
Any other quick response? No, Canada doesn't need a sovereignty. That's it's unfair to. Where we have a mic. Yes, sir.
Good morning. Thank you for the panelists. My name is Abdou Kolombik for the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture. I just have one question. We are talking about power and control. And when you look at, I was asking the same question yesterday. I think it's the right panel to discuss this. With the geopolitical, situation that we are in, and looking at when you are talking about imperialism and so on, and you're talking about the trust and where the data, where sovereignty and so on, depending on where the data is. But what about, a country decided to sanction another country or a huge region where all the data, all the infrastructure, all the tools sits? We saw it in 90% of the AI kind of services provided coming from two countries. And when multilateralism is no longer working, what are the pathways? Where are we going? And about this issue of sovereignty and so on. And I would like to have your perspective on that, where we are going, where multilateralism is no longer working, and to really provide some rules of how we can access these services. What are your perspective on that?
Yeah, okay, good point. Devon, we capture a couple more questions.
Okay, just to not forget about the people online, I'm going to read one of the questions, and it's from Ashley Muremba. Can digital sovereignty exist without cultural sovereignty? And what is the ability to tell our own stories and control how our data represent us?
My name is Bozra Spaudel. I'm from Nepal with the Institute for Future. This topic is very much relevant to the country that I come from, Nepal. We had a Genji protest just in September. The government was toppled and the prime minister was elected through Discord voting. And that tells us how much control, I mean, and then slowly it is coming out, the anonymous voters were all rigged. They were not even genuine Gen Z generation people registered in those discards. But then even the government of Nepal is unable to track and have those data from the companies, as Abdo was raising the point of they are under the control of some corporates. These are not even within the not approachable from the country like Nepal. Neither the multilateralism would be effective in coming to facilitate the dialogue between a sovereign nation and a corporate. This is not only a situation right now, but it makes me worry further going forward, because countries that are still struggling to democratize and institutionalize are going to be in a vicious cycle of becoming more and more fragile. And what would be your thought, and what kind of multilateralism platform do we need to envision when it's no longer about nation and nation, but about nation and a corporate form?
Maybe one last question, and then we'll put it to the panel. Next round of questions. I see one behind you. I see one here. Here. Behind you or there.
Hi, actually, I'm Jean from the Philippines. So my question is actually related to his question and his question about multilateralism. So, I think when we talk about digital sovereignty and digital imperialism, we cannot shy away with geopolitics. So I think some panelists already discussed it about the U.S. and China being the superpower. So I think in terms of multilateralism, even though APEC is just we call it like a talk shop, I think it's a platform to talk about ideas on how middle powers or regional blocking could talk about the start. It could be a platform to start talking about how we, merge how middle powers and smaller states could come together to come up with ideas and talk about it. So my question is a two-part question is, what do you think is the current role of the middle powers in terms of regaining power and control in our digital future? At the same time, this is for Htaike. Did I pronounce your name? Like, what could ASEAN do in terms of, like related to their questions? So those.
Great. Okay, so that's a lot to think about here. Power control, multilateralism, middle power. Htaike, do you want to start?
So yeah, I mean that's a lot of question, and I mean right now when we talk about like multilateral or and cooperation, and one thing that is becoming a concern for countries like ours means fragile democracy in repression, is the states are actually stepping in for not just for like support, but for financial gain as well. Like for instance, for Myanmar, the China is actually providing censorship for hire. So in Myanmar, the new censorship technology is being supported by the same company that provides China the infamous Great Firewall of China. So it's an import of censorship by a state. So I think this is becoming trendy, especially towards the repressive countries. And I think that in terms of in an ideal scenario, When we talk about like another type of multilateral collaboration or regional cooperation like the ASEAN, I think in an ideal scenario, countries like ours, it's actually very difficult for us to engage in like global conversations around governance, particularly issues around AI, because like honestly, we don't actually have a spot in the table when talking about like AI governance in either in us in the global context. So I think that like ASEAN will provide a space where countries like ours can actually cooperate and go hand in hand towards either other governance structure or even companies, because it's actually much more useful to actually do that. So I think that there are some good examples. ASEAN is drafting an AI strategy. So I think, in an ideal scenario, the AI strategy would be very useful for us. Maybe, the African Union's digital strategy 2030 is also something that it's in an ideal scenario, it's a good strategy for like regional cooperation. So I think that these are really, in the ideal scenario, good mechanism that we can get involved. But yeah.
Yeah. So thank you. I will try to answer a couple of questions together, and that's about the sanctions and the challenges to multilateralism, but also the case of those countries who have embraced the democratization process, and so now they are more fragile compared to consolidated democracies. Well, first of all, consolidated democracies are not as consolidated as we were supposing until some years ago. And yes, both the international liberal order and liberal democracies are under attack. We know that. So there is a huge challenge. And this is very bad because this is happening in parallel with the development of very powerful technologies like AI and robotics. So the two things together are very scaring from my perspective. Liberal democracies, so not just democracies in general, but liberal democracies are based on the idea of people's sovereignty constrained by some basic rules, the constitutional rules that usually are related to fundamental rights. So this is the thing that, because we have populist parties in Western Europe who are saying, okay, we need sovereignty, but people's sovereignty. And if people decide to make war, or people decide to discriminate a minority, it's sovereignty, it's not liberal democracy. Liberal democracy are a set of rules defending also minorities and so on. So in that case, digital sovereignty, I agree with all of you about the fact that digital sovereignty should be people's digital sovereignty, but with some constraints, with some limitations. That is very important. Otherwise, that could be also repursued towards other goals. And we are seeing this also in the European Union. The European Union, the discourse on digital sovereignty started with this focus on fundamental rights. It produced very good legislation in terms of politics. In terms of policy, we have to assess them, like the digital, the GDPR, the DSA, the DMA, that they were really constitutional rules. They were limiting the power of platforms. But at the same time, this discourse now is also used to buy new weapons, or to, for example, propose new technologies, like those technologies scanning our mobiles to see if there are pictures, pedopornographic pictures and so on. So but at the same time, also the concept of sovereignty can be reproposed for good. And Africa, the relationship between Africa and Europe are very clear about this. Africa was a victim of European sovereignty, but at the same time, after the Second World War, they reproposed that concept in order to get their own independence. So it's a play, and we have to see the outcomes. But at the moment, the conditions are not so good for liberal democracies, as well for the international liberal order. Multisecularism is not under threat just in the digital governance. We can see, what is going on at the international level. So this is the fact that digital technologies are shaped by political, geopolitical, social, and economic conditions. And so if we are living an era where conflict is the dominant dimension of relationships, if every kind of rules can be just put in a basket or in how do you say in English, in the rubbish, no? And even by the president of the United States, that has been seen as the real guarantor of the liberal democracy and the international liberal order at the global level. So you can expect anything about that and anything that is very bad from my point of view. As just another point of African Union strategies, I see that African Union is developing its own idea of digital sovereignty. It is doing this very well, but there is a concept that is usually attached to digital sovereignty that is politically neutral technologies, and this is quite dangerous. They mean that they do not want like the conditionality measures that the European Union has often imposed to African countries that wanted to receive our ads, but no technology is neutral. So even though the Chinese and the Russian governments are not imposing to make political reform, to respect the rights of women and so on, their own technology comes with political values embedded their own design. And so I think that African countries should be very careful in adopting this kind of concepts that could be like tricky concepts leading towards an adoption without awareness.
But I think your question is adequately answered, right? Are you happy with that? I'll just add a little bit. What I mentioned about an online movement, I think that's going to be helpful because the idea behind an online movement is kind of like take the middle ground. And as long as that is worked out, I don't know the modality, but it has to be worked out in such a way that there's a free flow of data and technology, but at the same time protecting the states, the member states, their sovereignty as well. So that balance needs to be there, but striking the middle ground. And also thinking about the middle ground, if you look at the case recently about TikTok, basically Trump was alone with that. How many countries followed him and said, yeah, we're going to ban TikTok too? You know, even Japan and Israel, who are really good allies of the US, didn't follow it, right? And if I were a politician, I would not have done that either. I prefer my citizens to be dancing rather than to be focusing on the issues in the country. So so it was really strategic to let that go. But let's assume that in reality, there was some element of espionage in that thing. It probably means that we have politicians who are happy to let that go so that they could survive. That's just food for thought. But I didn't want to forget the question online because I don't think anybody else addressed it. It was related to cultural sovereignty. The answer to that is yes and no. We have an opportunity now to develop the infrastructure for digital sovereignty within each country that would be rooted in the culture of our nations. We have that opportunity, and if we don't do it, then we just miss it. Obviously, technology often comes with foreign legal related attachments to it. But I do believe, I'm gonna call her out now. There's Chelsea here, a lawyer. Where's Chelsea? Yeah. Chelsea, you could comment on this if you like. Sorry, I'm not superseding you. But I believe that there are opportunities, even though we could import technology that comes with existing legal implications. I think there are opportunities to enact laws as well within each country to kind of keep that in check. I'm not a lawyer, but I think that's possible. So what I'm saying is that there are opportunities, and it's up to each government to really do that to make sure that whatever infrastructure they put in place really reflects the culture of the people, and it's really there to protect, that knowledge that exists within the country.
I just want to, I think I will reach different questions with what I just want to say. It come back to the use case I use in my introduction about digital access to research evidence. Just give you an example that because we have a very high level discussion here, but if you pick concrete case, it might differ. I just give you an example of a very specific problem, access to the scientific knowledge embedded in papers. It's an initiative that is going on right now. Okay, it's developing, it's a new initiative, small scale, but it's a good example where sometimes the state is not part of the solution, and private foundations, alliance with thinker in universities and other where we produce scientific knowledge can sit together and propose solution to this problem. And the example I want to provide is ESIC, the Evidence Synthesis Infrastructure Collaborative. A couple of, I think, 2 weeks ago, I think they announced they were able to raise 126 million for this platform. It will be a digital platform. So someone will go through the paywalls and do the evidence synthesis. So if you a corporate or a policymaker, you will be able to go there, ask questions, very specific questions, and what science is saying about that. And instead of relying on one studies, you will have everything that will be synthesized and reappraised for quality and so on. So I just want to bring this example to say that when we pick very specific problems, sometimes there are solutions that lie in the private or not state actor. But I understand the level of discussion we had about digital sovereignty, the big cables and clouds and big platforms. But I want to raise this because I think there is hope sometimes.
Great, excellent. And there's a lot of sober comments here, but I want to just underline, I think, how interesting ASEAN and the African Union are. We've been talking about policy sandboxes, and I think that those are two examples of sort of experimentation in policy, especially given that they are organizations that bring together a range of government types, quite some diversity, and yet an ability to also harmonize amongst the development of policies around digital sovereignty and other issues. I think we can do another round of questions. Can we see some hands? I see a hand right there. Okay, here and then over there and then behind you.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for your speech. I am Zura from Georgia, and my question is very simple. There was mentioned so many times, trust. So if people are struggling with trust with the governments and corporates, to whom they have to trust? This is the one question. And other, what will be the right context for developing trust in global level? As you already mentioned, that the context is not giving us the ability to do. So thank you.
Hello, thank you. My name is Hailu. I'm from Ethiopia. I just want to ask about cyber security attacks that are happening now. These attacks are happening to individuals, to companies, to states. Does digital sovereignty help us to minimize cyber security attacks in any way? Can countries that are having more digital sovereignty less prone to cyber security attacks? That's one question. The other question is about digital sovereignty vis-a-vis countries' participation in innovation. Can developing countries which are on the receiving end of digital technologies really maintain digital sovereignty? Because as it has been already mentioned, most developing countries are receiving technologies from advanced economies like China, US, and so on. And they are not there in the innovation part of it. And how can countries really claim digital sovereignty without meaningfully taking part in the innovation part of it? Thank you.
Gentleman up here with the lady. This gentleman.
Should I? Oh, okay. So I want to address this question about security, because that's related to sovereignty, and also this question about what about ASEAN and middle income powers. And if you talk to people at a place like Amazon, which controls lots of the data centers, they'll tell you, number one, many countries don't have data centers. They're in hubs that are clustered in specific countries. Philippines does not have its own. Most companies don't want to build data centers yet in the Philippines because of the high cost of electricity and other regulatory issues. So then the question is, if you want sovereignty over data, but there's no secure Amazon servers, of course you can build your own server and store it, but the Amazon people will tell you that it's much more secure to put it in their servers, where they spend an enormous amount of money on security. And then you say, well, how can you be sure that your nation's data won't be controlled by the country where that server is located, et cetera? And they'll say, they can't access any of the data. We can't even see people's data. It's kind of like a WhatsApp thing. Like, we provide it in a way where no one can get access to the data except for the people who own the accounts, not even us. So I don't know how credible that is. And if that's the case, I don't know how countries can even be able to enforce or monitor whether private companies are obeying laws that they've passed about data security of their own country's data. So we're all in this space of trust between corporates and countries, but it's not that easy. And then the other thing I think it's interesting to note on this issue of AI, where I think a lot of countries feel, and this is a response to the last question, that they need to design their own LLM models to have national security. It's also about security and sovereignty. Even though, of course, some of the models like DeepSeek are open source. So you can actually just see the code, but they're still worried that somehow embedded in there is some kind of vulnerability. So they'd rather develop their own. And lots of countries are doing it. India, Korea, I think Australia, governments are supporting the development of national LLM models so that they don't have to rely on models developed in other countries. I'm not sure where that will take competition in AI, but it's definitely on the minds of many governments. Thanks.
One last.
Yeah. Hello. No. First of all, thank you for all the panelists and the first round of questions. Those are really pertinent. And my question is in the same line, kind of. I am Shantan. I teach in an university in India. So during the discussion, you have mentioned about the part that the concept of sovereignty is a performative discourse, and there is power, and the concept is political, whether it is sovereignty in general or in the digital, field as well. So the question also raised by several of my colleagues that the power is now concentrated in either in US or in China and both sides of the world, where most of the companies are also located. So how this concept of sovereignty is used as kind of like a rhetoric to justify the cases, and also how the governments of the powerful countries are trying to use that rhetorical concept to really gain influence over other smaller or less powerful nations. So how is this? That I wanted to ask the opinion of the panelist. Thank you.
So thank you for your questions. Some are very similar, also similar to our title, that is digital sovereignty or digital imperialism, and the issue of the digital imperialism or colonialism is rising up. So I will focus on this. Yes, digital sovereignty is a discourse. It has political implications, but has also a future of the political discourses that is a hypocrisy. And indeed, Stefan Krasner defined sovereignty as organized hypocrisy. He meant a lot of things, but in this case, I will say that there is a discrepancy between what we are claiming for our own sovereignty and what we are willing to concede to others for their own sovereignty. And this is quite clear in the relationships between the European Union and African countries in terms of digital partnerships. And there is also another level of hypocrisy that is between what we are claiming and what we are doing. And again, the case of the European Union is a very good case to understand this kind of hypocrisy. For example, Gaia X project. It started with this idea to have a European cloud independent from the US big techs and so on. And at the end, we had the usual big tech participating in the project plus Palantir. And if you know what is Palantir, you can understand that it was even worse. And so, yes, there are contradictory paths, and often the same actor claiming sovereignty is acting in a very contradictory ways. And so this is very clear, for example, in some papers produced by European think tanks who are saying, look, we should defend our own digital sovereignty in Africa because the Russian and the Chinese are putting their antennas, 5G networks and infrastructures there and so on. So there is a contradiction because we are claiming at the same time that we will be independent from Chinese and American companies, but at the same time, we are reasoning just like them when dealing with African countries. So as for cybersecurity, this is more or less the same thing. The digital sovereignty discourse could be directed anywhere. And so, for example, in Italy, we are seeing that the digital sovereignty discourse that was born at the European level in terms of fundamental rights and so on has been securitized. There is the director of the previous director of the cybersecurity agency in Italy who has written this book, Baldoni, on digital sovereignty. And for him, digital sovereignty is just national security, just that. And many governments are thinking of digital sovereignty in terms of just national security. That is something that is completely different from the idea of European fundamental rights, European values, and so on. And about contradictions, well, for example, someone was saying, okay, it is more convenient to put my data on American companies like Google, Amazon, and so on. Yes, and there are some policies in Europe, like the NIS2 directive on cybersecurity, that is pushing forward this because they are saying, okay, we want to protect our own digital sovereignty, but at the same time, with their compliance mechanism, they are pushing institutions and large organizations to have their data hosted by these big tech companies because otherwise they could not be compliant with NIS2 requirements. And finally, yes, what can developing countries can do to protect their own digital sovereignty? There is no one single reason for one single action for the reasons that I have explained, but there are something that could be done. First thing is to, I think, and I will limit to one, but I have other two if you want. The best way to protect your own digital sovereignty is to think that the economic value of a country is not the principal parameter anymore to make deals and to buy technology. Currently, in this geopolitical situation, even a low-income country can be very appealing for other countries and for big tech, because for a network effect, if your country starts to use my 5G network, my standards, my protocols will acquire a value that is higher than the economic value alone. So maybe the geopolitical situation could be leveraged by low-income countries that could act like as they had a value that is higher than just the economic value.
Yes, I would like to answer the question around trust and who to trust if we cannot trust the state, or if we cannot trust the corporate, and who to trust. And I repeated about talking about digital sovereignty. It's very important to look at the approach of people-centered. And in order to do that, I think that we need to actually fill in a lot of gaps, and this resilience and these governance structures need to be built from the ground up. So one very practical, so it's not a solution, one very practical approach is, for instance, in terms of infrastructure, investing in local or small-scale infrastructure like community network or community internet or open source tools that reduce dependency towards big tech platforms are very crucial and very important in our part of the world. So, for instance, we have seen in Myanmar conflict areas that when the junta shut down the internet, there are communities that set up their own infrastructures and started to using it. So this kind of practical steps might be useful to build trust among the community and the alternative stakeholder rather than the state or the big tech. And another one is building capacity building around and digital governance, and also investing in governance mechanism that looks at that, I mean, that also incorporates perspectives from states like ours, like states in fragile democracy, states in conflict, so that, this governance infrastructure are also mechanism, are also not very high rich, and also talk about and also look at the practicality of the situation on the ground. So I think that's some practical way that we can build trust in other alternate stakeholders rather than the state and the corporate.
So we have time for maybe one more of you to respond.
All right. So I'll just try to respond to everything collectively as much as possible. We live in an age of distrust. If you look at, for example, Facebook, because I use Facebook quite a lot, almost every video I see, I have to ask, is this true or not? So we don't even trust each other. We don't even trust our friends. They put something out there, they don't tell us this was AI generated. What's the big deal? And making you think it's real. So we live in an age of distrust. What I would say is that to deal with this, I'm going to go back to the legal framework. I think that is where we have to anchor down. And we really need to protect at least that aspect of our lives. We need to ensure that the judicial system is truly independent, is not being controlled by the powers that be, etc. I think that's like our last frontier of defense, basically. Because when you sign up for anything, even if it's a government ID or whatever, they ask you to sign something. If you read the fine print there, it says the government commits to keeping your data safe or whatever. You need to hold them accountable to that. So to me, that is where it really lies. So we probably trust might not be it, but we need to just say, well, you committed to this. You said you're going to do this. And we just hold them accountable to that. Generally, all's well that ends well. So usually you won't have any problem until there's some leak or something. And that's when there's a big a big hullabaloo. So if things go well, it's not a problem. The cybersecurity attacks, I'm not really sure that we can do much about that. Anything that we create as man, we can infiltrate it, we can destroy it. So just look at it now. If you created it as a human being, there are ways to attack it. So to me, nations that are not in conflict may not really have an issue. If you look at cyber attacks in the last 10 years, they've always been a type of warfare. You know, USA was attacked, wasn't Hollywood attacked and stuff? Yeah, it's there. This is basically a part of warfare. So if you have a government that's, you know, has peace as its agenda and don't want to have any problems with their neighbors and stuff, I guess you'll be fine. There probably wouldn't be any attacks on the infrastructure. So I guess having a policy of peace could probably help evading attacks. And even the great USA, there was a claim that the elections were infiltrated by a foreign power. So so if USA could claim that type of weakness, then, you know, developing countries are basically in the same boat. I took the liberty of looking through the questions online. I just hope that we answered them. Interestingly, someone from Gaza is watching right now and sent a question as well, asking about, you know, if we can use this for developing people rather than war. The truth is, anything that we develop as humans can be used for positive or for negative. It's just who's behind the you know, the driving wheel. Finally, I want to end as well on a question someone asked. It was someone from the media, perhaps, asking the role of media. What I would say is this: that the media has to educate as well. I think what tends to happen, a lot of journalists, they think they're there to report only. But I think the media has a role to play to educate. And if the media does more education, then the citizens will be much more aware of their rights, etc. And they would then in turn hold the governments accountable. And the other thing that I'm seeing as well, media is using different platforms. I think those who are not doing that, they should do that. So yes, you have your web page, but post it on Facebook, put it on LinkedIn, put it on YouTube, TikTok, wherever. So when you have it on different platforms, even if there is a pushback from the government, they can't remove it from every single platform. So I think multiple platforms would also be useful. That's my advice to the media.
Excellent. So we're really coming to the end of our panel, and each of us has about 1 minute to wrap up. I want to just quickly mention how I think that this, again, puts us into alignment with history. Ithiel de Solopol, the eminent media theorist, wrote in the 80s a book that I commend to you all called Technologies of Freedom. To this day, it's still, I think, deeply salient. He was Italian, I believe, and he was informed by the rise of fascism in Europe and World War II. And he described to us a history of media that progressed from print to telephony to broadcast to cable to ultimately the internet and the digital age as a progression not of freedom but of control. And that ultimately, though, that the internet and digital technologies he saw as a potential change, that would be a technology of freedom. And I think actually what we're seeing today from the comments from the panel is that actually history continues to go forward as ever, that we see ways in which today's technologies are technologies of control, just as Ithiel de Solopol was saying that was true for the rise of broadcast or of telephony. The good point, however, is, as he mentioned in the 80s, that we can take a turn towards accountability, and that we can, as informed by the development of Europe post World War II, find the right routings towards a path forward. So I just think there's a lot of history resonating right now that I think is really powerful from the comments of the audience and the panel. You each have 1 minute, please, to wrap up.
Okay. Well, I I assumed that I would just have 1 minute. So last night I thought what would be my take when I jotted down. So what I would say is that digital sovereignty should be rooted in these principles. Human dignity should be at its core. And also it should encourage social innovation. So that comes back to the person who was asking about, the local aspects. We should also ensure that it doesn't further inequality, but rather narrow that gap of digital inequality. And it should not exclude anyone in society as well. And it should also protect local values, the traditional knowledge, etc., and practices that exist within the country.
Okay, just to say that digital sovereignty is adversarial, so it's embedded in conflicts. There's no way to escape that. It's contradictory. The same people claiming for digital sovereignty can contradict their own. And it is relational. It established new relations of also of alliance, of cooperation, and so on. And at the end, I don't know if it is good, it is bad. It is good as an analytical category in a period where we have geopolitical turmoils and huge transformations of liberal democracies. But I don't know if it is good or bad because I'm a political scientist, not a political philosopher. Thank you.
Thank you. So Myanmar stories, our existence and countries like ours actually reminds us that digital sovereignty can quickly turn into digital repression when actually it serves power and not people, and we must actually measure digital sovereignty not by who owns the data or cable, but how people can communicate or access to reliable information or to create freely and safely. And I really hope that we get to a day where we can redefine digital sovereignty from control to care, and also from ownership to empowerment. Thank you.
Thank you. My take will be on freedom. I think as a professor and a scientist and citizen, I think it's I'm preoccupied, to be honest. Actually, but it's very hard to predict because, as my colleagues say, we are in a geopolitical turmoil, and it's hard. This is why it was hard, a difficult panel and theme to think about, because we are in the middle of change, important change, and we don't. It's hard to predict where it's going to be. But I think the individuals, as individuals, we love freedom a lot, and we hopefully we will find ways to try to find innovative ways to navigate in this maybe over-controlled world. And I just finished with an example, micro example, in my countries, Canada, Quebec. You have on the AI side, all the new platform we have access to perform well. There's a tendency that people will not even trust the AI that is supposed to use on their platform in government, Copilot, because they scare their own employer will spy on them. So they bring another laptop and they connect on their cell phone to go to OpenAI and other platforms to do their job and performing more than, because Copilot is underperforming the other. I know it's a micro example, but I think it say a lot.
Wonderful. A time for change, but a moment for hope as well. Let's take this moment then to thank our panelists. And thank you to you all for your excellent questions and engagement.